Hey folks, Tristan here with another ND tutorial. In this video, we'll model the sci-fi hard surface latch I created a few years ago when developing the ND add-on. A few people on our Discord server asked if I could do a tutorial on this object, so here it is. This tutorial assumes you have a working knowledge of Blender and the basics of the ND add-on. We'll only focus on modeling the object, so texturing, lighting, and rendering will not be shown. If you're interested, we may do a separate video on that. Let us know in the comments. Let's get started. We first want to create the bulk of the shape, which is a rectangular block. So I'll start with a 200mm plane. Then I'll scale it along the y-axis about 1.8 times to get the rectangular shape we're after. Make sure to apply the object scale so we don't cause issues with later operations. Now, if you notice in the reference image, we have two distinct chamfers, one on the corners of the block and another along its perimeter. Lucky for us, this is extremely easy to achieve non-destructively. We'll start with the corners. I'll select all four corner vertices in edit mode and bring up the vertex bevel operator. We'll leave all the settings as is, but set the width to 30mm and then confirm. Next, we'll give the block some thickness using the solidify operator. Let's go with 45mm so it's nice and chunky. This thing needs to hold back gravity, so size matters. Finally, let's give it that second perimeter chamfer. Select all four edges in edit mode and run an 8mm edge bevel. Step 1 is complete. We now have our base shape. Let's now punch out the three central holes. The most straightforward way of creating a non-destructive disk is to create a plane and then circularize it. Let's do that for the first hole. Add a plane and set its size to 110mm. Then move it into place. With the plane selected, let's run the circularize operator and set the segment count high enough to get a well-defined circle, but not too high that we're adding unnecessary geometry. In this case, 10 segments will do the trick. Like most things in ND, don't sweat about the details up front, it's all non-destructive. Therefore, we can change the segment count if you need more or less later. Next, I'll align the disk with the face of the block. Neat. Let's give this disk some depth, as we'll use it as a Boolean utility object. With it selected, solidify it and make sure it extends through the bottom of the block. Then, shift select the block and run a difference Boolean. You could repeat that process twice for the other holes if you have nothing better to do. Alternatively, you could use a relatively new ND feature called duplicate utility. Let's do that. Duplicate the util object and slide it down. I want to resize the cylinder, but I don't want to mess up the object scale, so I'll jump into edit mode and resize the base planar mesh instead. It's about half the size of the primary cutout. The resulting geometry is denser than the first cylinder, so I'll recall the circularize operator and set its segment count to 8. Now repeat that general process for the last hole. Next, let's cut out the two side details of the block. Once again, let's whip out a trusty old plane. Move it to one side and then scale it up a bit on the y-axis. Then, at the risk of sounding repetitive, apply the object scale. You'll be surprised how many times not applying scale and or rotation can bite you in the butt later when you're working non-destructively. The corners of this plane need some rounding over, so in edit mode, select the target vertices and run a vertex bevel. Adjust the width so that the edge of the resulting arc touches the edge of the chamfer, and set the segment count to 8. Then, back in object mode, let's solidify the plane and use it in a difference Boolean. Since we want the identical cutout on the other side, let's mirror it and adjust if necessary. I want to tackle the surface level cutouts next. This is a somewhat involved process, so I'll explain it as clearly as I can, but feel free to re-watch this part multiple times if necessary. This object and blend file will also be available on Patreon if you'd like to grab a copy and support us while you're at it. A massive shout out to our current Patreons, Christina, Ennio, and Alex. So if you haven't already guessed, we'll need another plane. Slap one of those suckers down. Then adjust its dimensions to fit the area we want to add the cutouts. Once again, let's align this with the face of our block. We need to do some work in edit mode, so head over there. First, split the plane down the center with a loop cut or subdivision, whatever floats your goat. Next, I'll add 2 additional horizontal cuts. I want the center of each edge to be in the center of each circle, so I'll slide them up and down as necessary. Then, select the vertices of both edges on one side of the plane and merge them at the center. And repeat that on the other side. What we're left with is a bunch of faces that form the web of the cutout. Let's select these, inset them, and ensure we toggle individual faces. Follow that by inverting your selection and then deleting the selected faces. Hopefully, you'll be left with something like this. Let's add 2 smaller trapezoid-shaped planes at the corners to help fill the awkward spaces. I will then select the outer vertices and run a vertex bevel on them. 8 or so segments will do the trick. After that, if we look at what we've created in object mode, you'll see where I'm going with this. Let's solidify it by 20 millimeters, then run a difference boolean on the block. Now, the cylindrical cutouts look strange. Let's fix that. I will demonstrate a pro gamer move here, often referred to as cutting the cutter. To prepare for that, however, let's show all our util objects and rehydrate the 2 cylindrical utils. Then I want the webbed cutout back, so let's cycle over the block and select it. I'll then increase the size of the hydrated cylinders. One by one, I'll then use these as different Boolean utils applied to the webbed cutout utility. What we've done is add a circular offset or ring around the cylinder cutouts. They may not look perfect, but that's an easy fix. Let's find and unhide them and then adjust their size to resemble the rest of the cutout portions. I also cut out some relief or expansion joint slots in the original object, so let's do that as well. I won't bother outlining every step in detail here, you've seen it enough times already to get the point. Alright, well, we're on the home stretch now. The base block is complete, all that remains are the mounting bolts and their housing. I'll fast forward over the creation of the housing pieces, there's nothing new here, and then we'll talk about the bolts and the screws. For the bolts, we'll start with a plane once again and circularize it, then move it into the correct position. Finally, some solidification is applied to get the bolt's length and offset. I'll then apply a slight chamfer to the bolt. With the base of the bolt selected, let's bring up the sketch menu and select the screw head operator. I'll go with a Torx head for this. Adjust the scale and offset as needed. Once you're happy with it, align it to the face of the bolt head, then solidify it and run a Boolean operation. You can then mirror the whole bolt to the other side of the block. Next, let's add the screws on the face of the housing, which we can create in a very similar fashion to the bolt. Just start with one of them. With one of the screws complete, we can once again make use of a couple of new ND features to replicate these. The first is the linked duplicate operator. With the screw head selected, run the operator from the utils menu. This will duplicate the object, including its utils, but keep the mesh data linked to the original object. The reason why I'm doing this is because I want to add a bit of rotation to each screw so it looks a bit more realistic and less repetitive. In the original object, back when I first created it, I just arrayed the screws and then mirrored them to the other side. This is still a valid tactic, but it doesn't allow you to add the subtle rotation at the end. Now for the icing on the cake. Let's select the linked duplicates and then the original screw and run the sync modifiers operator. That way, if we ever want to change the bevel, for instance, we can do so on the original screw and all the copies will be kept in sync. Finally, let's add some grip to this thing. Once again, the process starts with a plane. We'll then circularize, solidify, and bevel it. Then, we'll rely on the trusty old array cubed operator to do the heavy lifting. We'll array the object along the x-axis and adjust its offset as necessary. Then do the same on the y-axis. Finish it off by mirroring it to the other side of the block. And there you have it. It lacks some detail on the bottom, but I'll leave that up to you. We can do more to help with its shading and overall realism. The first step is to add a finishing bevel to all the significant pieces. However, to do that successfully, we must clean up the geometry. I'll start by adding support edges, which help guide the additional edges formed by the Boolean operations performed on the block. That can be done by adding loop cuts to the base block and sliding them into place. I typically move them so that they cut right through the center of the holes, ensuring that the edges on the cutout and the support edge form as close to a 90-degree angle as possible. Since Blender will place these new vertices in the same vertex group as their direct neighbors when performing a loop cut, they'll be affected by the vertex bevel we created at the corners. To resolve this, I'll select the new vertices and, from the sketch menu, select Clear Vertex Groups. Then, repeat that process as many times as necessary. Once complete, you should be able to run a final object bevel. Let's do that now. It should be subtle, so don't go overboard with the width. It's only there to remove the infinitely sharp edges and help catch highlights from the scene lighting. We'll then completely fix the shading with a weighted normal modifier. I'll go around the object and do the same on the other major pieces. And there you go, one hot off the press sci-fi gravity latch. It packs flat too. Just turn off all the modifiers and you're left with a collection of planes. Alright, I think this video may have gone on long enough, so if you've made it to the end, great work. I hope you learned something new and enjoyed following along a non-destructive process in Blender. I'd love to see your versions of this, so feel free to join our Discord server and post your renders there. It's completely free to join. Until next time, happy blending.